the sun rose over the marble rooftops of Aegis, painting the cliffs above the Aegean Sea in hues of gold and crimson, while fishermen untangled nets in the harbor and merchants shouted over the clamor of their goods. Amid the ordinary bustle, Alekios, a young man of striking presence and restless curiosity, prepared for a day that would change his fate. Son of Lysandros, a minor Greek noble, and Helen, a priestess whose name lingered in whispers, Alekios had grown strong climbing cliffs and running rocky paths along the sea, his dark eyes always searching for something beyond the mundane. Clutching the bronze sword gifted by his father, he crossed the market square, glancing toward the temple of Apollo, where incense curled in the sunlight and priests murmured over sacred scrolls brought from distant lands. Rumors had spread that an ancient prophecy hidden in Egyptian papyrus had been uncovered, and Alekios, restless and daring, slipped through the side entrance of the temple, ignoring the offerings of fruit and oil laid at the altar. "Who goes there?" called a stern voice, and Alekios introduced himself, declaring his readiness to serve. The high priest Damon peered over his spectacles, warning that the words spoke of gods, monsters, and a hero whose deeds might sway the fate of Greece and Egypt. With a nod, he read the prophecy aloud. "When the sun burns highest over the twin seas, and the serpent of the desert stirs from its slumber, a hero born of mortal blood yet kissed by divinity shall rise to unite lands divided, to face the shadow that walks beneath the world, and restore balance where chaos seeks dominion." A chill ran through Alekios, for he had felt destiny's tug in dreams that whispered through the night, but never with such clarity. Word of Alekios' daring visit spread, and by noon he had gathered a small band of friends, athletic youths and aspiring warriors, to explore the hills beyond the city. The air was thick with thyme and wildflowers, and the rocky paths were alive with birdsong, yet a sudden scream tore through the morning calm. Without hesitation, Alekios scaled the cliffs, finding a merchant boy ensnared in nets, struggling against a thrashing sea serpent whose scales gleamed like molten bronze and whose eyes glowed with unnerving intelligence. Remembering his father's lessons, Alekios drew his sword and ran down the cliffside. The serpent lashed out, smashing rocks into the sea, but Alekios dodged, leapt, and thrust with precision, piercing its side. The creature howled and retreated into the waves, leaving the boy shaken but unharmed. "You are safe now," Alekios said, heart racing, unaware that his act had been observed by something darker, lurking beyond mortal sight. Evening brought an unexpected messenger, a falcon with golden eyes perched upon his courtyard steps, bearing a scroll tied to its leg. Trembling, Alekios unrolled the parchment, revealing strange symbols that glimmered in torchlight. The message read, "Alekios, heir of the gods' favor, your journey begins where the Nile kisses the sand. Seek the priestess Neferura, guardian of secrets and magic. The serpent awakens, and only together can you prevent the shadow from consuming the world. A friend beyond time." The prophecy was no idle warning. It was a call to adventure. At dawn, Alekios packed provisions, gathered his sword and shield, and prepared to sail into lands unknown, leaving familiar cliffs behind. As the ship cut through the morning fog, he gazed eastward, where the sun rose over foreign sands, sensing that destiny had begun its inexorable pull. No journey begins without an omen. As the ship sailed into open waters, the sky darkened unnaturally, swirling clouds and a whispering wind sending shivers down the crew's spines. From the depths emerged a shadow, a colossal sea creature with obsidian scales and eyes like molten coals circling the ship, testing their courage. Alekios stood at the bow, gripping his sword, recalling the lessons of the temple: courage, cleverness, and respect for powers beyond mortal control. The beast lunged and Alekios dodged and struck, but the creature was relentless. Just as the ship seemed doomed, a flash of golden light cut through the clouds, burning the sea, and the creature vanished into the depths, leaving only ripples and a hiss echoing in Alekios' ears. Heart pounding, He realized the world he had known was no longer sufficient to contain him. The journey foretold by prophecy had begun. Thus began Alekios' adventure, the first step in a path that would carry him from the sunlit cliffs of Greece to the burning sands of Egypt, to meet a priestess of profound wisdom, confront monsters and gods, and face a darkness older than memory itself. Already he sensed that the serpent of the prophecy stirred, and with it, the shadow that could consume the world. Courage, wit, and the blessing of the gods alone might see him through. And even now, fate had begun weaving its intricate threads around the young hero who would one day unite lands divided and confront the terror that walked beneath the world. The ship creaked and groaned as Alekios and his small crew cut through the turquoise waves, the wind carrying the salt of the Aegean and a sense of anticipation that none aboard could deny. For even the most seasoned sailors whispered uneasily about strange currents and sudden storms that seemed to follow the young hero wherever he went. Yet Alekios felt no fear, only a burning curiosity that had guided him since childhood, a certainty that the prophecy demanded he travel eastward, beyond familiar seas, to lands where the Nile stretched like liquid gold across the desert sands, a place ruled by gods who walked openly among mortals and whose power could shape the fates of kingdoms. And as the days passed, the ship encountered both wonders and dangers, from shoals that gleamed unnaturally under the sun to dolphins that swam alongside them as if heralds of some divine presence. And at night, Alekios would climb to the prow, gazing at the stars, memorizing the constellations, and imagining the land of Egypt unfolding before him with its towering temples, golden sands, and secrets buried for millennia, while the sea carried faint whispers, fragments of a voice he could not understand, promising both peril and guidance. And on the seventh dawn, as the coastline emerged from the morning haze, glittering pyramids and colossal statues rose against the sky, and Alekios' heart pounded with a mixture of awe and resolve, for he knew that his destiny intertwined with this foreign land, a place where the serpent of prophecy slumbered and shadows stretched deep beneath the sun-baked stones. And as the crew docked at a bustling port city filled with merchants from distant lands, exotic spices, and the haunting call of temple priests, Alekios' eyes fell upon a figure in flowing linen robes, standing with a calm authority that made the crowd part instinctively, her dark eyes reflecting the mysteries of the desert, the golden jewelry catching the sunlight like fragments of fire. And he realized instantly that this was Neferura, the priestess mentioned in the Falcon Scroll, the guardian of secrets and magic whose wisdom and courage would guide him through the trials to come. And as he approached, he noted the subtle aura surrounding her, a hum of energy that seemed to respond to his presence, and Neferura inclined her head slightly, her voice calm yet carrying the weight of ancient knowledge, greeting him not as a stranger but as someone long expected, confirming the prophecy's power. And she spoke of Osirion, the god of secrets in the underworld, whose ambitions threatened not only Egypt but lands far beyond, weaving a tapestry of intrigue and warning that made Alekios' pulse quicken. For the stakes of their journey had become immediately clear, yet alongside fear rose determination, for he had faced a sea serpent and survived. And now, aided by the wisdom of Neferura, he could confront dangers even greater. Together, Alekios and Neferura navigated the city's labyrinthine streets to a hidden temple where ancient papyri and artifacts whispered of secrets long forgotten. And there, under the flickering torchlight, they began their first trial, deciphering riddles etched in stone and guarded by spirits who tested courage, cleverness, and the purity of intention, for any who approached the relics unworthy were doomed to vanish. Yet Alekios, guided by instinct and divine favor, and Neferura, with her knowledge of sacred Egyptian rites, combined skill and intuition to overcome the puzzles, unlocking a chamber where a fragment of the artifact lay, shimmering with power and warmth. Yet as they approached, shadows coalesced into forms of darkness, minions of Osirion, creatures part human, part serpent, their eyes glinting with malice, testing both the young hero's strength and the priestess's mastery over magic. And a battle erupted in the chamber, Alekios wielding his sword with precise strikes, every motion fluid and confident, while Neferura chanted incantations, invoking divine energy that manifested as walls of flame and tendrils of light, pushing back the creatures, forcing them into retreat. And when silence finally fell, the chamber hummed with residual power, and the artifact fragment glowed softly, as though recognizing Alekios' courage and Neferura's wisdom, signaling the first victory in what would be a long and perilous journey. Yet even in triumph, Alekios could not shake the feeling of being watched. The certainty that Osirion's shadow lingered beyond the walls, plotting, waiting, and he knew that each step forward would only grow more dangerous. The next days were a whirlwind of preparation and exploration. As Alekios learned from Neferura the subtleties of Egyptian magic, the intricate ways in which words, symbols, and offerings could alter reality, and he practiced tirelessly, combining his natural agility and combat skill with mystical techniques, forging a partnership that grew stronger with every challenge. While Neferura began to trust him not just as a companion but as the hero foretold, noting the flashes of insight and courage that marked him as special. And yet, no matter how many lessons he learned, the shadow of Osirion loomed, manifesting in sudden tremors, eerie whispers, and visions in which the serpent slithered across lands in flames, eyes burning with hunger. And Alekios realized that the prophecy was not a promise but a burden, for failure would mean devastation across two mighty civilizations. And still he pressed on, for courage was demanded of heroes, and destiny waits for no hesitation. Their journey led them beyond the city, into deserts where golden sands stretched like seas frozen in sunlight. And as they navigated hidden paths marked by symbols known only to Neferura and her order, they encountered the first of many trials, a temple half buried in dunes, where the walls shifted and whispered secrets, and guardians, spectral forms bound by ancient magic, tested not only skill and strength but the resolve of their hearts, challenging Alekios to confront fears he had long buried, visions of failure, doubt, and the consequences of mortal hubris. Yet with Neferura at his side, interpreting omens and guiding him through incantations, Alekios endured, demonstrating cleverness and valor. And when the final guardian yielded, the temple revealed another fragment of the artifact, a golden amulet that pulsed with light and warmth, resonating with his own bloodline, confirming that he was indeed the hero of prophecy. But even in this moment of triumph, the first threads of betrayal began to stir, for distant eyes watched their progress. Allies could be false, and Osirion's shadow moved like a serpent across the lands, invisible but palpable. And as Alekios and Neferura prepared to leave the temple, the sky darkened unnaturally, wind carrying the scent of ash and magic. And from the dunes emerged a figure draped in dark linen, face obscured, radiating menace, whose arrival would force Alekios to test not only his physical skill, but the strength of his trust in Neferura and the wisdom of the gods. And as he tightened his grip on the sword, eyes meeting the shadowed figure, he realized that the adventure had only begun, and the path ahead would demand every ounce of courage, intelligence, and divine favor. For the Serpent of Prophecy was awakening, and with it, the darkness that threatened both Greece and Egypt. The desert stretched endlessly before Alekios and Neferura, a vast sea of gold and shifting sands that reflected the sun with a blinding intensity, while the wind whispered secrets through the dunes, carrying the faint scent of magic and danger. And though the heat was oppressive, Alekios pressed on, guided by Neferura's steady hand and the mysterious currents of destiny that seemed to flow around him. For the prophecy had demanded this journey, and he could not falter. Each step across the sand brought them closer to the heart of Egypt, where the Serpent of Prophecy had slept for centuries. And yet even as the familiar hum of adventure thrummed in his veins, the desert itself tested their resolve, for ancient guardians awoke at their approach. Spirits bound to the sands who challenged the strength of body and mind, summoning illusions of towering monsters, sandstorms that concealed hidden pits, and visions of loved ones in peril, forcing Alekios to confront not just the physical trials, but the fears lurking deep within his heart. And with Neferura's guidance, invoking chants and gestures that bent reality, he began to understand the delicate balance between mortal skill and divine intervention. learning to anticipate danger as much as to confront it, while their bond deepened, forged in the furnace of shared peril, with trust and mutual respect growing alongside their determination to succeed. For Osirion's shadow lay heavy over every step, unseen yet palpably present, manifesting in the restless winds, the sudden tremors beneath the sand, and the glimpses of serpentine eyes reflected in distant oases. As they approached the first hidden temple, carved into the side of a jagged cliff, its entrance half buried by centuries of sand, Alekios' pulse quickened, for he had glimpsed such structures only in scrolls and legends, places said to contain both unimaginable treasures and deadly curses. And Neferura, with her calm authority, deciphered the runes etched above the threshold, whispering their meaning, a warning that only those with courage, wisdom, and purity of heart could enter, for inside lay a fragment of the artifact they sought, guarded by magic older than any mortal memory. And as Alekios stepped forward, the sands shifted beneath his feet, revealing hidden traps, pits lined with spikes, walls that closed suddenly, and illusions meant to turn the mind against itself. Yet he moved with focus, drawing upon instinct and training, every step measured, every breath controlled, while Neferura chanted protective spells, guiding him through the shifting labyrinth. And together, they navigated the treacherous corridors, facing spectral guardians that demanded both intellect and combat skill, spirits who questioned their motives, memories of past failures and doubts brought to life. And as Alekios fought, struck, and evaded, he began to feel the first real weight of his role in the prophecy, understanding that courage alone would not suffice. He must also possess clarity, compassion, and cunning, for Osirion's agents were clever, patient, and merciless. At the heart of the temple, a chamber opened to reveal the fragment they sought, a crystal amulet that pulsed with warm golden light, resonating faintly with Alekios' own blood. And as he reached for it, the shadows around them solidified into a form more terrifying than any illusion. A hybrid creature, serpentine and humanoid, its scales black as night and eyes burning like molten gold, sent by Osirion himself to test their worthiness and perhaps strike down the hero before his strength fully matured. And Alekios, gripping his sword with unwavering resolve, felt a surge of divine favor, a whisper of guidance from forces beyond comprehension. And he charged, the clash echoing through the chamber, sparks of metal against scale, while Neferura conjured walls of fire and twisting lights, striking the creature with bolts of energy that sang through the air, forcing it to retreat. Yet the battle exacted its toll, for both warrior and priestess were pushed to their limits, their sweat mingling with dust, muscles trembling. But when the final blow fell, the creature dissolved into shadow, leaving behind only the faint echo of a hiss and a reminder that Osirion's influence stretched far beyond what they could see. Exhausted but victorious, Alekios lifted the amulet, feeling its warmth spread through his body, filling him with strength and clarity, while Neferura explained that each fragment of the artifact not only held power, but also tested the hero, shaping him for the trials that lay ahead. For Osirion's shadow would grow, his minions multiplying, and the final confrontation would demand every lesson learned here, every ounce of courage, skill, and magical understanding. And as they prepared to leave the temple, a sudden tremor shook the ground, revealing another entrance deeper into the cliffs, a hidden passage marked with runes that glimmered faintly, warning that their journey was far from over, that each victory brought new dangers, and that the serpent of prophecy was stirring, awakening to meet the hero whose blood and courage would determine the fate of two great civilizations. They emerged from the temple into the harsh desert sun, their bodies weary but spirits undiminished. For Alekios now understood the stakes and the depth of the journey ahead, and as they walked across the dunes, guided by Neferura's knowledge and the subtle signs of magic in the wind and sand, they encountered their first direct agents of Osirion, bandits infused with shadow, their eyes glinting with unnatural intelligence, attacking not just with weapons but with illusions and cunning, forcing Alekios to combine swordplay with strategy, improvisation, and quick thinking. while Neferura's magic shielded and counseled him. The duo moving in synchrony, each learning to anticipate the other's moves, trust deepening with every encounter, and when the battle ended, leaving the bandits fleeing into the dunes. Alekios realized that this desert was more than a physical trial. It was a crucible that tested heart, mind, and spirit, a place where courage and wisdom were inseparable, and where every step forward brought them closer to the awakening serpent, the shadow of Osirion, and the destiny that had begun with a prophecy whispered in a temple half a world away. As night fell, the desert sky stretching endlessly above them, dotted with stars unfamiliar to even a Greek navigator, Alekios and Neferura set camp near a hidden oasis, the water cool and pure, the palm trees rustling softly, and as Alekios lay awake staring at the heavens, he reflected on the lessons of the day. Courage alone would not be enough. Skill alone would not suffice, and magic, while powerful, could not replace wisdom and trust. He needed all these qualities, fused into a single purpose, for the challenges ahead would be greater, more cunning, and more perilous. And already he could sense the serpent's stirrings, the shadow's reach extending across both sand and sea, and though the night was silent, he felt the heartbeat of destiny in the wind, whispering that the journey had only begun, that each fragment of the artifact collected would draw them closer to both glory and peril, and that in the end, the unity of Greece and Egypt might rest on the strength of a single hero and the courage of a priestess whose knowledge was as deep as the Nile itself. And with this understanding, Alekios slept lightly, dreams filled with serpents, golden light, and the promise of trials yet to come. The desert stretched endlessly as Alekios and Neferura pressed onward, golden sands glittering beneath the relentless sun. Yet every step forward carried the weight of unseen eyes and the whispered warning of prophecy. For they were no longer simply travelers, but seekers of power, guardians of a destiny intertwined with the fate of two great civilizations. And as they approached the next temple hidden within jagged cliffs that rose like stone sentinels from the dunes, Alekios felt the subtle hum of magic in the air, the pulse of an ancient force that had slumbered for centuries, waiting for the hero foretold. And Neferura, with her calm authority, led him past jagged rocks and hidden runes etched with hieroglyphs that shimmered faintly, warning of traps and tests, while she chanted protective spells to shield them from curses laid upon the desert long before mortals had walked its sands. For the temple was older than the kingdoms themselves, a place where Osirion's power had first been sealed, and where the serpent of prophecy slept in latent fury, its awakening drawing nearer with each fragment of the artifact that Alekios carried. And as they crossed the final ridge, the entrance of the temple loomed before them, a massive archway carved with figures of serpents entwined with suns, guardians of a secret older than time, and the air shimmered with energy, as though the stones themselves breathed and waited. Stepping inside, the temperature dropped, shadows dancing unnaturally across the walls, lit by flickering torches that seemed to respond to their presence. And immediately, the trials began. Floors that shifted beneath their feet, walls that twisted into impossible angles, and glyphs that shimmered with latent magic, demanding both intellect and courage to decipher. For each step forward required solving riddles that tested memory, intuition, and the ability to think beyond mortal constraints, while Neferura whispered incantations to keep them safe, guiding Alekios with subtle gestures and ancient words. And yet, even with her guidance, danger lurked at every turn, for the temple had been designed to punish arrogance, fear, and hesitation, and Alekios found himself confronting visions of failure, of cities in flames, of friends and loved ones lost to shadows, all intended to weaken his resolve. And as he navigated these illusions, he realized that courage alone was insufficient. He had to trust not only in Neferura, but in his own perception, intuition, and growing mastery of the subtle hints left by the ancients. For magic and traps often intertwined, and a misstep could mean death. Deeper into the temple, they encountered their first guardian, a colossal sphinx, its body of stone and eyes of molten gold, speaking in riddles that twisted logic and perception, demanding answers that tested knowledge of both Greek and Egyptian lore, of myths, stars, and the balance of mortal and divine, and Alekios. Recalling the scrolls he had studied in Greece and Neferura's teachings of Egyptian mysticism, answered with precision, each word unlocking a mechanism that caused the guardian to step aside, revealing a hidden passage lined with murals depicting the serpent coiled around the sun, eyes glimmering, and men and gods bowing before its threat, the artwork alive with magic that shimmered and shifted as though watching them move. And Neferura explained that these murals were more than decoration. They contained warnings, clues, and lessons for Osirion's influence extended beyond mere physical manifestation, embedding cunning traps into the very essence of the temple. As they continued, they faced the trial of mirrors, a chamber where reflections of themselves twisted into monstrous forms, whispering doubts, fears, and secrets, tempting Alekios to strike out in anger or retreat in hesitation. And only through focus and trust in Neferura's guidance did he see the illusions for what they were, realizing that the challenge was as much about self-mastery as physical prowess. For Osirion sought to manipulate not just the body, but the mind and spirit. And as they emerged from the chamber, Alekios felt a new clarity, a sharpening of senses, as though the trials themselves were forging him into the hero the prophecy demanded. While Neferura nodded approvingly, her eyes reflecting pride and caution. For though he had passed this test, the shadows of the god of secrets and the serpent were growing ever closer, threading through the sands, the air, and even the hearts of those around them. The final trial within the temple was the Chamber of Serpents, a vast hall where coiled stone and living serpents intertwined, guarding the fragment of the artifact they sought, eyes glinting with intelligence and malice, scales glimmering with an otherworldly sheen. And as Alekios stepped forward, he felt the weight of every choice he had made on this journey, every battle, every puzzle, every ounce of courage. For the guardian creatures sensed his essence, probing for weakness, for doubt, for hesitation, and Neferura, chanting incantations that drew energy from the very stones of the temple, created a protective circle of light around them, giving Alekios the moment he needed to act, and with precise strikes, agile movements, and strategic thinking, he disabled or evaded each guardian, demonstrating that his skill, bravery, and cunning had matured beyond the simple training of youth. And when the last serpent hissed and slithered back into the shadows, the fragment of the artifact revealed itself, a golden disc inscribed with runes that pulsed with power, warmth spreading through Alekios as he lifted it, feeling its resonance with the blood of his lineage and the divine favor whispered in the prophecy. Exiting the temple into the desert sun, Alekios and Neferura faced new challenges. Osirion's agents, human and inhuman, awaited them among the dunes, watching their departure, testing their vigilance, and forcing them to move quickly while maintaining awareness of the traps, hidden ravines, and the restless sands. For the desert itself seemed alive, a manifestation of the god's power, and every step carried the possibility of ambush or magical assault. Yet Alekios, strengthened by the trials, sword in hand, eyes sharp and mind alert, led them safely past danger, while Neferura's spells shielded them from attacks that might have felled a lesser hero. And as they camped near a hidden oasis under a sky ablaze with stars unfamiliar to any Greek navigator, Alekios reflected on the lessons learned. Courage, skill, and magic were essential, yet trust, clarity of mind, and understanding of both mortal and divine nature were the true tests. For the Serpent of Prophecy and the Shadow of Osirion were awakening, and the path forward would demand every ounce of preparation, wisdom, and bravery they could muster, while the artifact fragments they carried pulsed faintly, reminders of both progress and the mounting dangers. And as the desert wind whispered through the palms, Alekios knew that each trial had prepared him for the next, more perilous step, for the hero's journey had only begun. The serpent stirred, and destiny awaited beyond the sands, in the temples yet unexplored, and the battles yet to come. The desert seemed endless, stretching beyond the horizon like a golden sea, and Alekios and Neferura pressed forward, each step heavier than the last, carrying not only the weight of the blazing sun, but the burden of destiny. for they had successfully claimed the second fragment of the artifact. Yet victory brought with it new threats, and the winds whispered of unseen eyes tracking their progress, shadows moving across the dunes as if the desert itself were alive with Osirion's will. And though Alekios' body ached from the trials of the previous temples, his spirit remained unbroken, fueled by the clarity of purpose and the growing bond with Neferura, whose calm authority guided each movement, each decision. Yet tension simmered beneath the surface, for even allies could harbor secrets, and loyalty, once assumed, could not be guaranteed in a world where the god of secrets wove his influence invisibly through both mortals and the land itself. As they navigated a narrow valley flanked by sandstone cliffs, a small caravan appeared on the horizon, seemingly offering assistance. Merchants with supplies, guides familiar with hidden paths, and information about the treacherous terrain ahead. And Alekios, wary but trusting the signs, allowed them to approach, for experience had taught him that not every encounter in the desert bore malice. Yet intuition whispered caution, for the serpent of prophecy stirred in ways subtle and imperceptible. And as the caravan drew near, the leader, a tall man with a finely trimmed beard and eyes that glittered with ambition, greeted Alekios warmly, offering food, water, and guidance, while Neferura observed silently, eyes narrowing, noting the faint shimmer of concealed magic in the man's robes. And Alekios, eager to trust but sensing tension, agreed to travel with them for a short distance, the desert sun casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the sand, each step echoing with the faint hum of destiny's pull. The journey began smoothly enough, the caravan moving with practiced precision. But subtle signs of duplicity soon appeared, whispered conversations halting as Alekios approached, glances exchanged when Neferura's attention drifted, and small inconsistencies in their stories. For Osirion's influence often worked through human greed and fear, rather than direct confrontation, preferring manipulation and betrayal to open violence. And Alekios, recalling the lessons of the temples and the vigilance demanded by prophecy, observed quietly, noticing how the shadows of the dunes seemed to move unnaturally, as if responding to the hidden malice in the caravan. And by the third day, the truth revealed itself in a sudden, violent ambush. The allies drew weapons, their eyes glowing faintly with magic drawn from Osirion himself, and attacked not only with swords and arrows, but with illusions designed to confuse, divide, and terrify, forcing Alekios to act swiftly, drawing his blade with precision, each swing measured, while Neferura invoked protective wards and strikes of divine light, countering the corrupted magic, and the desert erupted into chaos, sand swirling in violent gusts, weapons clashing, and shadowy figures attacking from every angle, the roar of battle echoing through the cliffs, a symphony of danger that tested their skill, trust, and courage to the fullest. Even amidst the chaos, Alekios maintained clarity, dodging arrows and magical strikes, using the terrain to his advantage, leading the remaining loyal members of the caravan and Neferura in counterattacks that combined strategy, agility, and the growing mastery of magic, while Neferura's voice carried through the storm of sand, directing protective sigils and focusing energy to disrupt Osirion's influence over the traders. And step by step, they overcame each wave of attackers, striking decisively, using traps of the desert, and turning the ambushers' own illusions against them, forcing them to retreat, leaving behind only scorched sand, scattered supplies, and the faint echo of hissing that reminded them the serpent of prophecy was always watching, waiting, and their journey was far from safe. Exhausted but undeterred, Alekios surveyed the aftermath, noting the betrayal not just of the caravan, but the reality that even those who appeared innocent could be instruments of Osirion's will. And he realized that caution must now accompany courage, that vigilance would become as essential as skill, and that the desert itself, with its shifting sands and hidden dangers, would serve as both adversary and teacher, revealing truths only to those willing to endure its trials. And Neferura, ever composed, helped tend wounds, reinforcing protective spells and emphasizing that betrayal was as much a test as combat. a challenge to the mind and heart as well as the body, for only by navigating both treachery and peril could they grow strong enough to face the serpent and the god whose shadow now stretched across the land. The following nights, as they camped beneath skies ablaze with unfamiliar constellations, Alekios reflected on the lesson the desert had delivered. Trust was precious, yet fragile. Every choice bore weight, and each misstep could spell ruin. And though the betrayal had cost them time and resources, it had also strengthened their resolve, sharpened their instincts, and cemented the bond between hero and priestess. For Neferura's guidance had proven indispensable, her wisdom transforming fear into clarity, and her magic shielding them from death when mortal skill alone would have failed. And as the winds carried the distant hiss of serpents, Alekios tightened his grip on the sword, feeling the pulse of the artifact fragments against his chest, a reminder that each victory, however hard won, was only the beginning. For Osirion's shadow was growing, his agents cleverer, and the serpent stirred in its hidden lair, coiling beneath the sands, waiting for the moment when Alekios would be tested as never before. And with this understanding, Alekios resolved that no betrayal, no ambush, and no shadow could deter him from the path laid by prophecy. For courage, wisdom, and trust must now guide every step, every swing of the sword, and every incantation of Neferura's magic as they journeyed deeper into the deserts of Egypt, closer to the temples, the artifact, and the awakening serpent whose threat stretched far beyond their imagination. The desert gradually gave way to the rolling plains that marked the borders of Egypt's northern reaches, where fertile fields met the encroaching sands. And Alekios and Neferura, weary yet undeterred, pressed onward, carrying the fragments of the artifact like beacons of hope and warnings of the danger that pursued them. For the serpent of prophecy stirred beneath the earth, and Osirion's influence seeped through mortal hearts like venom, corrupting greed, ambition, and fear. And as they traveled, Neferura spoke of the necessity of alliances, not merely with those who shared their immediate goals, but with the rulers, generals, and scholars of distant lands, including Greece, whose armies and knowledge might tip the balance in the coming struggle. And Alekios, recalling his homeland and the loyalty of his friends there, understood that his destiny now required more than courage and skill. It demanded diplomacy, strategy, and the forging of bonds that could withstand deceit. For Osirion's reach extended beyond the desert, and even the strongest hero could be undone if left alone against the god of secrets. Their journey brought them to a fortified city at the edge of the desert, a crossroads of traders, scholars, and emissaries from lands both near and distant, where Neferura introduced Alekios to a council of Egyptian nobles and priests who had long resisted Osirion's subtle manipulations. Their robes heavy with embroidered sigils, eyes sharp with intelligence and suspicion, and it was here that Alekios first witnessed the delicate balance of power, the intricate web of politics, ambition, and ancient feuds that shaped the land. For while the prophecy named him hero, no mortal court would offer unreserved aid without careful persuasion. And so he spoke, recounting his victories, the fragments of the artifact, and the growing shadow of Osirion, demonstrating courage, clarity, and a respect for both Egyptian custom and divine law. And Neferura, her presence commanding yet measured, lent authority and credibility to his words, illustrating that the gods themselves had touched his life, and that their mission was more than personal ambition. It was the salvation of civilizations. Despite their eloquence, resistance arose, whispers of doubt, suspicion that Alekios might be an agent of foreign powers, and that the Greek hero's destiny could serve personal gain rather than the greater good. Yet the council's younger members, inspired by tales of the sea serpent, the temple trials, and the golden artifact fragments, advocated for alliance, and after days of debate, it was agreed that a contingent of Egyptian warriors, guided by Neferura's wisdom and Alekios' leadership, would accompany them to secure the remaining artifacts, protect the cities along the path, and confront Osirion's increasingly bold minions, a compromise that strengthened their position but introduced new responsibilities. For Alekios was no longer merely a hero acting alone. He was a commander, a symbol, and the decisions he made would ripple through lands both Greek and Egyptian. As the newly formed alliance prepared to march into the deeper deserts, word arrived of disturbances along the trade routes. Caravans attacked, temples desecrated, and travelers vanished. All signs of Osirion's growing influence and the awakening of the Serpent foretold in prophecy. And Alekios, understanding the urgency, coordinated with the Egyptian generals to fortify defenses, plan ambushes, and deploy scouts, while Neferura consulted ancient texts and invoked protective spells over the soldiers, ensuring that divine favor and mortal strategy worked in harmony. And as they moved forward, Alekios noted the diversity of the forces arrayed: Greek mercenaries skilled in sword and spear, Egyptian archers with unerring aim, mages versed in the manipulation of light, shadow, and elemental forces, all united under the banner of necessity, yet aware that unity would be tested by the cunning and ruthlessness of Osirion's agents. For the god of secrets delighted in sowing discord, turning allies against each other, and exploiting weaknesses with subtlety that mere mortal foresight could scarcely detect. The march into the desert was grueling, heat shimmering off the sand, sudden storms of dust, and the ever-present threat of ambush by creatures twisted by Osirion's magic, some part human, some part beast, all imbued with cunning and malice. And Alekios, though battle-tested, realized that leading a force so diverse required not only personal skill, but the ability to inspire, to communicate strategy, and to adapt to threats that arose from both mortal and divine sources. While Neferura's magic shielded the troops from illusions, bolstered morale, and ensured that even the bravest warriors did not falter when confronted by visions of doom. For each step forward was a test, not only of physical endurance, but of unity, loyalty, and the capacity to act as one against overwhelming odds. One night, as they camped beneath a sky blanketed with stars unfamiliar to Greek eyes, Alekios and Neferura convened around a map, studying the routes, the location of temples, and the potential lairs of Osirion's minions, tracing paths through dunes, valleys, and rocky passes, noting where traps might lie, and devising strategies to recover the remaining fragments of the artifact. For the Serpent's awakening was imminent, and with each passing day, its influence reached farther, stirring not only beasts and shadows, but mortal hearts, tempting greed, fear, and betrayal. And Alekios, reflecting on the lessons of the past months, temple trials, desert ambushes, and the fragile trust of allies, understood that the coming battles would demand more than sword and magic. They required foresight, unity, and the ability to anticipate moves not only of enemies, but of allies. For Osirion's power worked in whispers and subtleties as much as in brute force, and the survival of both Greek and Egyptian lands now depended on their combined courage, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to the path foretold by prophecy. The alliance moved as one, each step forward a testament to the growing bond between Alekios and Neferura, their leadership guiding the diverse forces through harsh terrain, hostile encounters, and the uncertainty of divine interference. And though the desert seemed endless, filled with shadows and whispers, each trial strengthened resolve, honed skills, and deepened understanding. For the hero of prophecy would not simply wield a sword or collect artifacts. He would unite people, inspire trust, and endure treachery, challenge, and magic alike. And as the first rays of dawn gilded the dunes with gold, Alekios felt the pulse of destiny beneath his feet, the subtle stirrings of the Serpent, and the growing shadow of Osirion, and he knew that the true tests were only beginning, that the alliance of Greek and Egyptian forces, while strong, would soon face trials of loyalty, courage, and magic beyond anything yet encountered, and that the path to victory would demand not just bravery, but wisdom, foresight, and the strength to act as both hero and leader, uniting mortal and divine forces against the awakening threat whose shadow stretched across lands and seas alike, waiting for the moment to strike. The newly formed alliance, led by Alekios and Neferura, embarked on a sea journey that would take them along the Nile toward distant temples where the remaining artifact fragments were said to lie, the river stretching like molten gold under the sun and reflecting the vast skies above, while the ships, a fleet of Egyptian vessels reinforced with Greek design, cut through the water with precision and speed, carrying warriors, mages, and supplies. Yet the calm surface belied the danger that awaited, for Osirion's reach extended beyond land and sand, and the Serpent of Prophecy stirred in hidden depths, ready to unleash creatures and trials that tested every facet of mortal and divine skill. And as the fleet sailed, Alekios stood at the bow, sword in hand, scanning the horizon, feeling the pulse of magic in the river, the subtle currents that hinted at creatures lurking beneath, while Neferura moved among the crew, chanting protective spells, her voice blending with the rhythmic motion of the oars in the wind, weaving enchantments that guarded against both mundane and supernatural threats. For the river was alive with ancient power, as was the land and sky, and no mortal eye could perceive the forces moving around them. On the third day of the voyage, as the fleet passed a narrow stretch of the Nile flanked by cliffs and dense reeds, the water erupted in a roar of scales and teeth, and a colossal hybrid creature emerged, a monstrous fusion of crocodile and serpent, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intelligence, body coiling with terrifying speed, and a scream of fury echoed across the river as it lashed at the ships, splintering oars, tossing crates into the water, and hurling warriors into the river's current. And Alekios, without hesitation, leapt into action, his sword flashing in the sunlight, striking at the beast's thick scales, while Neferura, chanting in a voice that carried the power of ancient gods, summoned walls of fire and currents of light that twisted and danced along the river, slowing the creature's assault, giving the fleet moments to regroup and defend themselves. And together, hero and priestess moved in synchrony, Alekios dodging snapping jaws and serpentine strikes, landing precise blows, while Neferura manipulated the river itself, creating whirlpools and barriers of magic that diverted attacks and shielded the vulnerable, demonstrating a coordination forged through months of trials and battles. And through determination, skill, and divine favor, they forced the creature to retreat, leaving behind only ripples, splintered wood, and the echoing hiss that reminded them Osirion's shadow was never far. Even as the fleet recovered, the dangers multiplied, for smaller hybrid creatures began to emerge from the reeds. Crocodiles imbued with serpentine intelligence, snapping at warriors, pulling oarsmen into the water, and attempting to overturn smaller vessels. And Alekios, moving from ship to ship with agility and precision, coordinated defenses, directing soldiers to fend off attacks while simultaneously striking down beasts that breached the lines. His swordplay, a blend of Greek martial discipline and instinct honed from months of temple and desert trials, while Neferura's magic flowed seamlessly across the fleet, reinforcing barriers, binding enemies temporarily with ethereal chains, and infusing courage into wavering soldiers, turning panic into coordinated resistance. And with every wave of attack, Alekios' leadership grew, his ability to inspire and act decisively proving as vital as his skill with the sword, while Neferura's mastery of magic demonstrated that mortal strength alone could not contend with forces drawn from divine and unnatural realms. Amid the chaos, Alekios glimpsed a figure atop the cliffs overlooking the river, cloaked in dark linen and radiating malevolence, the unmistakable mark of Osirion's agents observing and perhaps guiding the attacks. And understanding the danger, he signaled a maneuver that led the fleet into a narrow gorge, where Neferura channeled magic to manipulate the river's current, creating a trap that isolated the hybrids, forcing them into confined waters where the warriors could strike effectively, while Alekios confronted the largest of the beasts, dodging crushing jaws, striking with precision at joints and exposed scales, and finally delivering a decisive blow that sent the creature thrashing into the cliffs, defeated but leaving Alekios panting and bloodied, the exertion burning through his muscles. Yet the artifact fragments he carried pulsed warmly, a reminder of divine favor and the stakes of his journey. As the fleet sailed further, the sky darkened unnaturally, clouds forming spirals of black and gold, and Neferura warned that the Serpent of Prophecy was sensing the hero's progress, stirring both creatures and currents. while Osirion's agents would continue to manipulate mortal and magical forces alike. And Alekios realized that each victory, though significant, was only a prelude to larger, more perilous challenges, for the final fragments of the artifact lay in temples guarded by curses, monsters, and the very will of Osirion, and to reach them, he and Neferura would need to combine strategy, courage, and magic more precisely than ever before, coordinating armies, fleets, and spells while anticipating both mortal treachery and divine malice. Night fell over the Nile. The fleet anchored near a small island, and Alekios stood watch under the stars, reflecting on the lessons of the river. Courage and skill could overcome immediate threats, but foresight, trust, and unity were essential for survival. For Osirion's reach extended beyond the obvious, weaving chaos through subtle manipulations, hidden eyes, and whispered commands. And Neferura, resting nearby yet ever alert, reminded him that magic alone could not guarantee victory, that only through the combination of mortal skill, divine favor, and unwavering resolve could the prophecy be fulfilled. And as the wind whispered through reeds and the water lapped against the hulls, Alekios felt the pulse of destiny in the river, the subtle stirrings of the serpent beneath, and the shadow of Osirion stretching across both land and water. And he understood that the true tests were only beginning. For the hero's path required not only defeating monsters but uniting forces, mastering magic and confronting treachery, deception and divine wrath, and with this resolve, he tightened his grip on his sword, feeling the warmth of the artifact fragments, and prepared for the challenges yet to come, knowing that the journey along the Nile was only the prelude to the awakening of the Serpent and the ultimate confrontation with Osirion. The fleet finally reached the mouth of the great desert, where sand stretched endlessly in rolling waves beneath a scorching sun, and Alekios and Neferura disembarked with the Alliance's warriors, the air heavy with anticipation and the scent of ancient magic, for the first of the final temples lay buried within the dunes, hidden from mortal eyes by spells older than kingdoms. And as they approached the massive stone entrance carved into a cliff, Alekios felt the pulse of the artifact fragments against his chest, a steady, reassuring warmth that hinted at both power and responsibility, while Neferura whispered incantations to unveil protective glyphs and ward against traps, her voice carrying over the desert winds. And together they stepped into a hall where shadows seemed alive, walls shifting subtly as though breathing, and the floor littered with symbols that glowed faintly under their feet, each step demanding attention, intuition, and courage. For the temple's magic tested every aspect of mortal perception, forcing them to navigate illusions, shifting corridors, and riddles that required both Greek reasoning and Egyptian mystical knowledge. And Alekios, recalling lessons from the previous temples, guided the warriors with patience, observation, and decisive action, while Neferura directed spells to reveal hidden dangers, creating paths through shifting stone and blinding light, their coordination seamless as they progressed further into the heart of the sacred complex. Deeper inside, the trials grew more severe. A chamber of reflective surfaces challenged perception, where every movement was mirrored by monstrous versions of themselves. Whispers carried illusions of treachery and failure, and the very air seemed to warp reality, testing resolve and the ability to act decisively despite fear. Yet Alekios, focusing on both instinct and logic, led the group with precision, striking down shadows that manifested as spectral serpents while guiding soldiers to avoid hidden pits. And Neferura, chanting in a rhythm synchronized with his movements, created protective wards and strike spells that amplified their efforts, demonstrating that courage alone was insufficient, and only through trust, understanding, and unity could mortal and divine forces navigate such a trial. For Osirion's influence permeated even the very stones of the temple, whispering doubt and attempting to fracture morale. The most formidable test awaited in the inner sanctum, where a colossal guardian, a serpentine construct infused with Osirion's dark magic, coiled atop a dais, eyes burning like molten gold, scales etched with symbols that pulsed with arcane energy. And as Alekios stepped forward, he understood this was more than a mere obstacle. It was a measure of his growth, skill, and readiness to confront the serpent itself. For the guardian embodied every lesson of courage, wisdom, and divine favor that the hero had learned along the journey, and the battle began in a symphony of motion and magic. Alekios striking with precision, sword flashing against reinforced scales, while Neferura manipulated currents of energy, fire, and light, creating openings and disrupting the guardian's attacks, the walls of the chamber responding to their magic, amplifying spells and twisting against the construct, as though the temple itself were alive, assisting those who proved worthy, and every maneuver, parry, and incantation tested timing, intelligence, and endurance, forcing both hero and priestess to synchronize completely, their bond and coordination at the peak of months of shared trials. Finally, after what felt like hours of relentless combat, the Guardian's massive form shuddered, a final strike of Alekios' sword and Neferura's focused incantation shattering its core, sending shards of magical stone scattering across the floor. And as the dust settled, a compartment opened, revealing the next fragment of the artifact, a crystal orb glowing with inner fire, humming with warmth and resonating with Alekios' own energy, confirming the hero's growth, skill, and divine favor. And yet the triumph was tempered by a sudden chill in the air, a faint whisper that carried a malevolent tone. The unmistakable presence of Osirion himself, or at least a fragment of his power, observing, testing, and anticipating. For the shadow of the god of secrets stretched even into the sanctum, unseen but palpably present, reminding them that victory here was only a prelude to greater trials, and that each fragment of the artifact, while a boon, also drew them closer to the confrontation that would determine the fate of both Greece and Egypt. Emerging from the temple into the blinding sun, Alekios and Neferura felt the desert wind carry faint hisses and whispers, shadows moving just beyond sight, and the knowledge that Osirion's influence extended across both sand and stone, manipulating mortal hearts, awakening beasts, and commanding minions with subtlety and precision. And as they regrouped with the warriors, tending wounds and reinforcing wards, Alekios reflected on the lessons of the temple. Courage alone could not overcome darkness. Skill alone could not suffice, and magic alone could not prevail. For only through unity, trust, foresight, and unwavering resolve could they hope to confront the serpent and the god who sought to twist destiny itself. And he realized that the final temples, the remaining artifact fragments, and the awakening serpent would demand everything from both hero and priestess, testing their leadership, courage, strategy, and the bonds they had forged with allies, while the pulse of the fragments and the subtle hum of Osirion's shadow warned that the ultimate confrontation approached. And with this awareness, Alekios tightened his grip on his sword, feeling the warmth and power of the artifact against his chest, and prepared to journey deeper into the deserts, toward temples yet more dangerous, riddles yet more intricate, and guardians yet more formidable, for the prophecy's fulfillment would require not only the strength of arms and magic, but the wisdom, courage, and unity of all those who followed the hero's path. The desert grew harsher as Alekios and Neferura led the alliance deeper into its endless expanse, golden sands stretching like waves under the relentless sun, the wind carrying faint whispers of power and malice, for the shadow of Osirion had intensified, awakening not only serpentine beasts and dark magic, but stirring mortal greed and fear, and every step forward demanded vigilance, courage, and cunning. For the path to the second final temple was littered with traps both natural and supernatural, shifting dunes that concealed bottomless pits, mirages that twisted perception, and spectral guardians that appeared without warning, testing both resolve and the ability to act decisively in the face of illusions. And Alekios, attuned to the pulses of the artifact fragments, guided the group with confidence, observing subtle shifts in wind, sand, and magic that revealed danger, while Neferura, chanting protective and revealing spells, ensured that illusions and curses could be countered, her power flowing seamlessly through both terrain and allies. And together they navigated the treacherous sands, moving with coordination, strategy, and the trust forged over countless battles, temple trials, and desert ambushes. By mid-morning, the Alliance encountered the first of Osirion's sentinels, a band of desert creatures fused with shadow and serpentine intelligence, their scales glinting in the sun, eyes glowing with malevolent cunning. And Alekios, sword in hand, led a counterattack that combined martial skill, strategy, and divine favor, while Neferura's magic twisted currents of sand into walls, blinding the attackers and creating opportunities for precise strikes. And the soldiers, inspired by the hero's courage and the priestess's command, executed maneuvers with discipline and agility, forcing the creatures to retreat. Yet Alekios knew this was only a prelude, a test of readiness, for Osirion's hand guided them subtly, probing for weaknesses in morale, unity, and magical coordination. And as the dust settled, faint hisses and whispers in the wind reminded the Alliance that the Serpent of prophecy was stirring, sensing their progress and that larger threats lay ahead. Further along the dunes, they encountered environmental hazards amplified by magic, sandstorms that moved unnaturally, twisting into shapes that obscured vision and threatened to bury the unwary, quicksand traps that pulsed with magical energy designed to drain life and strength, and rock formations that shifted when approached, blocking paths or creating perilous cliffs, forcing Alekios to constantly anticipate danger, adapt strategies, and act with precision, while Neferura reinforced wards, countered curses, and guided both soldiers and the hero through the treacherous terrain, blending divine knowledge with practical tactics. And as night fell, they made camp near an oasis hidden behind a wall of dunes, the water shimmering with faint magical energy, the stars above foreign yet familiar in their constellations. And Alekios reflected on the lessons of the day. Victory in battle required not only courage and strength, but foresight. Strategy and unity, for Osirion's power was subtle, indirect and deadly, capable of turning even allies against each other through fear, greed, or manipulation, and awareness of these forces was as critical as skill with sword or magic. The following day, the Alliance reached the outer defenses of the second final temple, a massive structure half buried in sand, its walls etched with runes that pulsed faintly, a warning of the trials within. And as they approached, spectral guardians emerged, constructs of stone and shadow imbued with Osirion's cunning, attacking with both brute force and magical assaults designed to test endurance, intelligence, and perception. And Alekios, leading from the front, coordinated strikes and defenses, combining swordplay, battlefield tactics, and artifact-infused energy to break through the waves of guardians, while Neferura directed magical barriers, strike spells, and protective wards that countered curses and illusions, their combined efforts turning chaos into controlled progression. Yet every step revealed the temple's increasing complexity, with corridors that shifted, floors that disappeared, and glyphs that demanded precise understanding of both Greek and Egyptian lore to navigate safely. And each trial within strengthened the Alliance's cohesion, while reinforcing the reality that Osirion's minions would continue to escalate in power, intelligence, and malice as they neared the awakening Serpent. Inside the temple, the challenges intensified, traps that combined physical and magical peril, riddles that required both divine insight and mortal logic, and guardians whose strength and speed tested every ounce of skill Alekios had honed through months of adventure. Yet the hero adapted, using the pulse of the artifact fragments to anticipate threats, striking with precision, evading with agility, and coordinating with Neferura, whose spells amplified, protected, and guided the Alliance through hazards that would have overwhelmed lesser heroes. And when the final chamber opened, they faced a mini-boss guardian more powerful than any previously encountered, a colossal serpentine creature with wings of shadow, eyes that glowed with Osirion's malice, and scales etched with runes that pulsed with destructive magic. And the ensuing battle demanded coordination, strategy, courage, and endurance. Alekios striking with divine-infused precision while Neferura manipulated elements, light and energy to create openings and counteract the Guardian's attacks. And after a grueling contest, the creature was defeated, leaving behind the next fragment of the artifact, a crystalline fang imbued with the warmth and pulse of divine power. resonating with Alekios' courage and the unfolding prophecy. And as they recovered, a shadow passed across the chamber, subtle and malevolent, Osirion's influence unmistakable, reminding them that the god of secrets watched, tested, and manipulated from afar, ensuring that no victory was without consequence, and that the Serpent's awakening approached ever nearer. Emerging from the temple, the Alliance found the desert wind whispering with hidden menace, shadows flickering unnaturally across dunes, and Alekios felt the pulse of destiny in the sand, the subtle stirrings of the Serpent, and the ever-present influence of Osirion reaching through both the land and mortal hearts. And he realized that each fragment recovered, while empowering, also drew them closer to the confrontation that would determine the fate of both Greece and Egypt, and that the remaining temples, trials, and guardians would demand even greater courage, skill, strategy, and unity, for Osirion's reach was limitless. His minions relentless and the Serpent's power rising, coiling beneath the sands, ready to strike when the hero and his allies least expected. And with this awareness, Alekios tightened his grip on his sword, feeling the warmth and energy of the artifact fragments against his chest, while Neferura reinforced protective wards and surveyed the desert horizon, and together, they prepared for the next stage of their journey, deeper into the heart of Egypt, where the final temples awaited, the ultimate tests loomed, and the awakening Serpent stirred beneath the sands, its shadow stretching across all that they sought to protect. The desert seemed to stretch endlessly, golden waves rolling beneath a searing sun, and Alekios and Neferura led the Alliance onward, every step heavy with the knowledge that the penultimate temple lay ahead, hidden within a vast canyon that shimmered with mirages, illusions, and the faint pulse of ancient magic. For Osirion's shadow had grown stronger, reaching through both mortal hearts and the very sands themselves, and every gust of wind seemed to carry whispers of warning and malice. Yet Alekios, strengthened by months of trials, temple battles, and victories, moved with confidence, his senses attuned to both danger and opportunity, while Neferura, her voice calm yet commanding, guided protective and revealing spells, ensuring that illusions, curses, and hidden traps were revealed before they could harm the soldiers. And together, they moved through shifting dunes and jagged rock formations, observing subtle cues in sand, wind, and magic, the pulse of the artifact fragments guiding their path as if the temples themselves responded to the hero's presence, drawing him closer to destiny and to the awakening Serpent beneath the desert. Approaching the temple, Alekios observed the massive stone doors, etched with hieroglyphs and symbols that pulsed with energy, forming an intricate puzzle that seemed to react to thought and presence. A divine trial designed to test not only intelligence but courage, perception, and unity. For the ancients had infused the temple with magic that could discern truth from deception, resolve from hesitation, and bravery from fear. And Alekios, with Neferura's guidance, began deciphering the glyphs, recognizing patterns that connected Greek philosophy with Egyptian mysticism, combining logic, intuition, and magical insight to activate mechanisms hidden in the walls, floors, and even the air itself while the soldiers watched, learning to trust the hero's judgment and Neferura's divine knowledge. And as the doors slowly opened, the ground trembled with energy, revealing a hall filled with shifting lights, moving platforms, and magical currents, each step a test, each choice a potential peril, and the pulse of the artifact fragments grew stronger, resonating with the hero's presence, a silent encouragement that he was walking the correct path. Yet the sense of Osirion's unseen eyes pressing upon them intensified. Within the temple, the Alliance faced the trial of shifting pathways, platforms of stone suspended over bottomless pits, corridors that twisted upon themselves, and illusions that mirrored their deepest fears, while spectral guardians moved through walls and floors, striking with both intelligence and speed, forcing Alekios to act decisively, his sword striking down enemies while Neferura manipulated light, fire, and magical currents to create openings, shields, and guidance, and together they navigated the treacherous terrain, coordinating with soldiers, teaching them to rely on trust, timing, and instinct, for even a single misstep could spell disaster. Yet the challenges served as preparation, sharpening reflexes, intuition, and unity, all essential qualities for the confrontation that awaited with the serpent itself, whose awakening drew ever closer, coiling beneath the earth like a living shadow. Sensing the hero's presence and responding with subtle, insidious power. As they neared the inner sanctum, Osirion's agents launched a coordinated assault. Warriors infused with shadow, mages wielding corrupted elemental magic, and creatures twisted by divine malice, attacking in waves to weaken the alliance before they could claim the next fragment. And Alekios, recognizing the magnitude of the threat, commanded the soldiers with precision, coordinating sword, shield, and spear, while Neferura amplified attacks, countered spells, and protected allies with wards of divine energy, turning chaos into strategy, each battle maneuver blending instinct, skill, and foresight. And as the tide of enemies pressed forward, Alekios struck decisively, guiding the alliance through ambushes, traps, and illusions, while Neferura's magic neutralized threats, bolstered courage, and illuminated hidden dangers, demonstrating the necessity of unity, trust, and coordinated action, for victory relied on more than individual skill. It demanded cohesion under pressure and the ability to act as one against the insidious forces of Osirion. At the heart of the temple, they faced the penultimate guardian, a massive construct infused with divine and shadow magic, serpentine in form with wings of dark energy, scales etched with runes that pulsed in rhythmic patterns, eyes burning with sentience, a trial that tested strength, courage, strategy, and magical coordination. And the battle that ensued was a symphony of action. Alekios striking with precision while anticipating the Guardian's patterns. Neferura directing magical energy to counteract its attacks and protect allies. And soldiers moving as one, each action complementing the other, weaving together mortal skill and divine power. And after relentless combat, the Guardian was defeated, dissolving into energy that coalesced into the next fragment. A serpent-shaped talisman, warm and pulsing with divine resonance, reinforcing Alekios' courage, clarity, and readiness for the final confrontation. Yet even in victory, the air shimmered with Osirion's unseen presence, subtle, malevolent, reminding them that no success came without consequence, and that the awakening serpent sensed their progress and would strike when least expected. Emerging from the temple into the harsh desert light, Alekios and Neferura felt the pulse of destiny intensify, the wind whispering both warnings and encouragement, shadows flickering unnaturally across dunes as though alive with Osirion's influence. And Alekios realized that each fragment acquired, each trial overcome, and each battle survived had prepared them for the ultimate confrontation. For the hero's journey demanded courage, skill, foresight, unity, and unwavering resolve. And with the alliance regrouped, spirits strengthened, and artifacts pulsing with power, Alekios and Neferura set their sights on the final temple, the last fragment, and the awakening serpent, knowing that the trials ahead would test every lesson learned, every ounce of strength and magic, and that the fate of Greece and Egypt rested on the hero's courage, the priestess's wisdom, and the unity of those who followed them. For Osirion's shadow stretched across the land, coiling invisibly, preparing for a reckoning that would decide the destiny of civilizations and the fulfillment of prophecy itself. The desert ahead seemed endless, waves of golden sand shimmering beneath the blistering sun. Yet Alekios and Neferura pressed onward with unwavering resolve, the pulse of the artifact fragments guiding their path like a living compass. And as they approached the final temple, hidden within a massive canyon carved by both time and divine intervention, the air vibrated with a palpable energy, dense with the presence of Osirion and the Serpent of Prophecy, whose coiled power beneath the sands thrummed like the heartbeat of the earth itself. And the Alliance's warriors, seasoned by countless trials, followed with heightened vigilance, aware that the culmination of their journey would test every skill, lesson, and ounce of courage they possessed. For this temple, older than kingdoms, was the convergence of mortal ambition, divine will, and the dark malice of a god who delighted in secrets, illusions, and manipulation. And as they stepped across the threshold, the massive doors, etched with hieroglyphs and celestial symbols, pulsed in rhythm with the artifact fragments, as if acknowledging their approach, and Alekios felt a thrill of both fear and determination, knowing that the final confrontation was imminent. Inside, the temple unfolded as a labyrinth of shifting corridors, enchanted floors and walls that shimmered with arcane energy, illusions twisting reality, hiding traps, and conjuring visions designed to test every aspect of courage, intellect and unity, and Alekios, attuned to the artifact fragments, guided the soldiers and Neferura through the shifting environment, recognizing subtle cues in light, shadow, and pulse of magic that revealed safe paths while avoiding deadly snares, while Neferura's voice carried across the corridors, weaving protective wards, dispelling curses, and unraveling illusions with precision, her divine insight transforming potential chaos into coordinated progression. And with each step, the sense of Osirion's influence grew stronger, a dark presence that whispered in their minds, sowed doubt, and tested alliances, ensuring that only those united in courage, skill, and trust could survive to confront the awakening serpent. Deeper into the temple, the Alliance encountered their greatest magical trial yet, a vast hall filled with floating platforms, shifting pillars and cascading streams of light and shadow, all controlled by a mechanism that responded to thought, courage, and intent, requiring simultaneous action, precision, and faith, for any hesitation or misjudgment would trigger traps capable of annihilating even the most experienced warriors. And Alekios, sensing the rhythm of the artifact fragments, coordinated the movements of soldiers, predicting shifts in platforms and patterns of light, while Neferura manipulated currents of magic to stabilize unstable platforms, counteract harmful illusions, and amplify the Alliance's endurance. And together they advanced, step by careful step, through a landscape that tested not only physical prowess but mental acuity, teamwork, and spiritual resolve, all under the ever-present gaze of Osirion, whose shadow seemed to move through the air itself, observing, influencing, and challenging, a reminder that the final victory demanded more than courage. It required absolute unity, clarity, and precision. As they reached the inner sanctum, the air thickened with energy, shadows coiling along the walls like serpents, and at the center, the fragments of the artifact glowed with resonant light, hovering above an altar carved with celestial and serpentine motifs, pulsing with divine and mortal energy. And Alekios realized that the final piece of the prophecy was within reach. Yet before they could assemble the artifact fully, a colossal guardian emerged, a fusion of shadow, stone, and serpent, imbued with Osirion's will, eyes glowing with malice, scales etched with runes that pulsed with destructive magic, wings stretching across the hall, and voice like 1,000 hissing whispers challenging their presence. And the ensuing battle tested every skill Alekios had honed over the journey. Swordplay, leadership, intuition, coordination, while Neferura's magic countered the Guardian's attacks, shielded the Alliance, and amplified every strike, blending mortal skill and divine power into a single unstoppable force. For only through their combined effort could the Guardian be overcome and the final fragment secured. After an epic struggle, Alekios delivered a decisive blow to the Guardian's core, as Neferura channeled a final surge of protective and destructive energy, and the creature dissolved into shadows and sparks, leaving behind the last artifact fragment, a sun-shaped medallion that pulsed with warmth and divine resonance, connecting seamlessly with the other fragments in Alekios' possession, forming a complete artifact that hummed with energy, illuminating the chamber with golden light. Yet even in triumph, Osirion's presence became undeniable, a shadow coalescing into form at the edge of the hall, his eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence, his whispers filling their minds with doubt and fear. And Alekios understood that the god of secrets would not remain distant. For the awakening serpent stirred fully, coiling beneath the sands, responding to the completed artifact, ready to strike, and now the final battle was imminent, requiring courage, unity, foresight, and every ounce of skill and magic they had cultivated across temples, deserts, rivers, and trials. With the artifact assembled, Alekios and Neferura felt its power resonate with their courage, unity and purpose, strengthening both body and mind, and together with their alliance, they prepared to confront the Serpent of Prophecy itself, a creature whose power dwarfed mortal comprehension and whose awakening would shake the foundations of Greece and Egypt alike. While Osirion's influence manifested in shifting shadows, corrupted minions and divine malice throughout the chamber, testing not only strength but faith and resolve, and Alekios, gripping his sword, felt the weight of history, prophecy, and destiny converge upon him, understanding that the coming battle would decide the fate of civilizations, and that only through courage, unity, and the flawless coordination of mortal and divine forces could they hope to survive, overcome Osirion's manipulations, and finally face the Serpent whose coiled power awaited, ready to challenge the hero foretold in prophecy. And as the golden light of the artifact bathed the chamber, Alekios and Neferura steeled themselves for the ultimate confrontation that would determine the fate of the world itself.